Hey everyone, this is Louis7 and I have some exciting news for the Lord of the Rings Online, and it is about Update 28, which is going to be titled The War of the Three Peaks, and Cordovan, who is the community manager for LOTRO, gave kind of a sneak peek and gave us some early details about this, and one of the big things is it's being called a mini expansion pack. So in this video, again, the details are going to be a little bit scarce because it was an early sneak peek. We don't know everything yet, but because of that, in this video, I'm going to focus my thoughts on the hopes for the update and upcoming mini expansion. And I do also want to shout out Thurinwar on the LOTRO forums for making a compilation of the information from Cordovan's livestream, during which this mini expansion was announced. That was definitely helpful in preparing this video. But to start off, just to cover the details of this, the first thing is it is labeled as a mini expansion again. So this has a normal edition for $20, collectors for $59, and then the ultimate edition for $99. So that part is a bit scary to me and will actually be the topic of my next video on this update. But for this one, I'll just leave you all with just the facts here and continue on. So with this update, there will be no level cap increase, so we are staying at 130. We will have a new raid, and Cordovan later confirmed there will be a new 6-man instance at least. So we'll have new raid gear, new instance gear it sounds like, and the raid I think is supposed to be the same tier as the Minas Morgul Rimmerchant raid. And then the most odd feature of the expansion for last tier, there will be new boar mounts, which is insane. I have to look up the lore about that because, as you all know, I'm not too familiar with all that. But anyway, for the releasing details of this update, as far as we know, it will be available in October, which could be anywhere from like 3 weeks to 7 weeks from now. But it will have the first beta sometime next week. Again, no details on exact dates or anything, and we should have more information throughout the next few days. And like with the beta coming, obviously we'll have the patch notes. So it is exciting that we'll get finally more details on what this mini expansion actually includes. So now that the news is out of the way, I do want to focus on talking about my hopes for the update. And one thing I actually forgot to mention, because Cordovan later confirmed, like after his live stream, that this would be in it, there's going to be the new missions feature, which allows players from level 20 to 130 participate in what is like, I think it's considered kind of like quest content, but the missions are more involved than quests. It sounds like more things to do. So that's just another exciting feature from this update that actually somewhat makes it seem like it might be worth the mini expansion title. But as far as my hopes for the update, I think it will be extra interesting to actually think about, because we don't know all the details and what actually makes it worth being called a mini expansion. So now's like a good opportunity to think about what I really hope to get out of the update. And for my very first hope is that it actually is worth being called a mini expansion. I've talked about that so many times throughout this short part of this video already, and right now it does sound kind of like a quest pack that is just being called a mini expansion to make like specifically VIP subscribers who already pay for the game tab pay for that on top of it. So of course the price is cheaper than a full expansion, so it doesn't need to have as much as like a full expansion's worth of content to it, but it still to me needs to be enough to be worthy of the mini expansion title. And additionally, on this note, I was actually hoping it would be available for LOTRO points right off the bat, but Cordovan confirmed later that it would not be, and you'll only be able to buy it for money right away, and then LOTRO points it'll be available later. But I thought, because it is a mini expansion as they're calling it, I thought that would be a fair like settling point for monetization of the update, that like VIPs have to pay for it, but you can just let them use LOTRO points. And again, we don't know the exact details on everything with that, the exact release dates, when it will be available for LOTRO points, so I will cover all that type of stuff in the topic for my next video. But for now, I want to get that out of the way and just shift to what I hope out of systems and major features from the update. So first off, there is a new raid. Of course, I hope this is enjoyable and would be excited to participate in the raid. But on the topic of in-game content features, I would actually be way more excited if the raid scaled to low levels, or at least there would be a new feature that scales with level. And I bring this up because there is going to be the missions feature with the update, and that was one of the things in the Update 27 review video I did. I covered a recent interview with the LOTRO's executive producer, and they mentioned that they wanted to give new content that low-level characters could participate in. So before Cordovan confirmed that missions were actually going to be in this update, that's one of the things I was just thinking about, that my low-level characters could somehow participate in the new content. But I don't necessarily still think that the raids should scale or the instances should scale. I think it would be interesting, especially if the missions, it would actually make sense that they could scale. That would be very fun if the raid and instances scaled 20 to 130 and it fit within the missions that also scaled 20 to 130. But kind of my point here is I think that's actually a good thing, and one of my hopes before Cordovan confirmed that the missions would be in this update was that essentially missions, or at least scaling content that low-level characters could participate in, would be in the update. So I hope all that made sense, but anyway, my kind of what I want to shift to is the missions, and I just really hope these are ready to go, polished, and not a lot of bugs with them. And the main thing is that they actually provide fun content like instances, and not, at least for me, like epic battles. And I also think the major system like this, the missions rather, that they can make the update being worth called the mini expansion. But to move on from that a little bit, for the rest of this section, I want to cover in-game progression features. And first of all, I won't repeat all that I said in my recent video about improvements that LOTRO needs. But one thing I want to touch on from that is that I really hope for some catch-up mechanics with like legendary items and gearing at in-game in general. So I'm a fan of having catch-up mechanics when a new update comes out that gets you like ready for the new content and update. So like there's going to be a new raid, new instance, and obviously the questing and content that comes with the update. So having catch-up mechanics early on in the update that gets you like ready to be able to go through the content, it basically makes it more accessible to different players, and as far as I'm concerned, that's a totally good thing. But for here, I'm not sure if update 28 will contain the legendary item revamp, but one thing I've always wanted with that system is some catch-up mechanics, because as you get high level, if you don't put a ton of effort into scrolls and crystals into your legendary item after imbuing it and all that crazy stuff, it just becomes insanely weak, which is unfortunate. But yeah, just having some sort of catch-up mechanic with allies would be nice, and my actual highest hopes as far as catch-up mechanics go would be Virtue XP catch-up mechanics, and later in this video I'll actually talk about that with missions. I think missions are the perfect opportunity to give a Virtue XP as a reward, and essentially a catch-up mechanic in a way, but not necessarily exactly like that. But the rest of the things I could really list and talk about here would basically be repeating that improvements video that I mentioned. So basically I would just recommend checking that out if you want a full list of what I think LOTRO could use. And of course I would like to see all those things in this update, but I'll just leave that there and we can move on to the actual content of the update. So, of course, I hope that the content of the update with actual zone, quest, storylines, and the raids, and just whatever instances and missions, all that will be fun. Of course, I hope that. But more specifically, at least with questing, I hope that is like what we had in more recent times of LOTRO. So Vales of Anduin, and especially Mordor Besieged and the Morgul Vale, have been some of my favorite zones to quest in for a very long time in LOTRO, and I have not gotten to Wells of Langflood yet on Luiden to know what it is like, but in general I would just really love for this mini expansion to continue the more fun quest flow and quest design that has been in the recent updates. And another thing I've also been thinking about to shifting to instances and raids is what makes them fun. Unfortunately, I have also not been able to work on the Minas Morgul instances with like a group, but I have done the solo instances. That's the gameplay in the background on Luiden. But I also haven't been able to do the raid yet, and hopefully that will change soon. But my point is with this is I can't comment on the recent quality of raids and group instances too much. But with that said, I really hope the raid and potential instances, the 6-man, will be enjoyable to go through. Details are still limited, of course, but it doesn't sound like there will be a regular instance cluster, just a 6-man and a raid with the update. But one thing I would really love is if these were easy to participate in, but of course offer a challenge on a higher tier. So going back to what I said at the beginning of this little section is that I've been thinking about what makes instances and raids fun, and the ability to participate in them very easily is definitely one of the things, that they're easy to access. But then at higher tiers you have that higher difficulty if you want the extra challenge and rewards. But then kind of going to the thinking about the raid with the term enjoyable. That's really subjective, but the main things for me to cover with that actually have to do with pacing of the raid. So first off, I am not a fan of long, extra difficult trash fights. I think trash fights are good actually and serve as breaks between boss fights where you can actually relax a little bit and in a way get refreshed for the next boss fight. But some raids don't feel like this in LOTRO, unfortunately, but some raids do, and they're very fun. And it's kind of hit and miss throughout my LOTRO experience. And again, I unfortunately have not been to some of the more recent raids in the game. But anyway, the point here is I really hope trash fights don't take very long. And to talk about the actual boss fights, I guess to shift on from that, I personally enjoy some of the more extravagant boss fights in LOTRO. There are so many crazy ones throughout all the raids and even instances in LOTRO. But there are a lot of those you would see sometimes in like Ingmar and Moria instances. And I don't mean the Ingmar instance cluster, but Shadows of Ingmar area level 1 to 50. And I actually don't think these types of fights should be too common, even if they're very enjoyable to me. And otherwise, I'm just honestly not too sure what to comment on from boss fights, besides that I would like to see, I guess, interesting mechanics like these extravagant boss fights, but mechanics that don't cause lag would definitely be a good thing. And as far as the crazy boss fights in LOTRO, they have a initial barrier to entry in a way. You have to know the mechanics. They don't necessarily have to be extremely difficult, but you have to know the mechanics, and things like that are okay, but again, I think in a limited variety. I'm not sure with all the recent raids if that's been a thing that's been going on with them. But anyway, to shift from that, overall I just hope the raid is fun, is probably how it's best put, and we can move on from that. The other new content coming with the update is missions, and again, we have little information on this besides Cordovan's confirmation that there will be at least 80 missions that are more involved than typical quests, and they scale from level 20 to 130. But from these, I really hope they become a long-term system for LOTRO, at least if they are enjoyable to begin with. That's kind of the initial requirement. They have to be fun, but there are tons of systems in LOTRO that have been abandoned over time. So we had skirmishes, which are basically abandoned now. Then we had mounted combat brought in and slowly abandoned. Then we had epic battles that were also, in my opinion, a bit slow in the abandoning process, but there haven't been new ones for a while. We also had instances and raids abandoned for a period, but fortunately for us, they were brought back, and we even had like roving threats and things like that, which have remained relatively abandoned, even though some of these features, even like the roving threats and old instances and even old epic battles and just the content types here, they are still run today. There's just been lacks of updates with them. So one of the things I'm really hoping about missions is that they're a new polished game system that can actually be kept long-term in the game, and future content will be built with them in mind and even maybe a little bit around them. Because to me, the idea of missions sounds really great. They sound like an instance type set of quests that scale where low-level characters can participate in them. And it really lets these low-level characters ultimately participate in the new content of LOTRO. And actually, one of the biggest barriers for new content in LOTRO is that you have to level up all the way to 130 through a ton of content. So many of the slow levelers in the game who take their time to enjoy what they're doing, which there's definitely nothing wrong with that. Sometimes I'm like that on my characters, but the point is they never get to experience any of the new stuff that is as it's like happening, going on now, even if they want to and want to go through those areas. You just have to go through a ton of content to get there. And I think missions, at least on paper, sound like a great system to alleviate this. And anyway, I guess to sum up my thoughts on this, I really hope that missions are fun and become a long-term system that is not abandoned in the near future. So we can move on from that, and I think the next part I need to cover is gearing and touching back on in-game character progression. So as far as the zone goes, I think questing in it should give you gear that is good enough to do tier 1 content. And by the way, I don't actually have any idea what the zone is. I'm thinking it's going towards Gundabad, but I really have no idea. It might be going back towards Moria area, where the 3 peaks, at least where I understand the 3 peaks are. But off from that tangent, going back to this, I think that questing in the zone should give you gear that is good enough to do tier 1 content of both the old Minas Morgul instances, of course, but even the new raid and the 6-man and any other potential new instances and missions features that might be coming. And this is something actually just broadly believed to be true, that tier 1 content in LOTRO or any game for that matter should be easy and be more of a mechanic and group work check rather than a gear check. I think basically any sort of pug should be able to do tier 1 content with a fair amount of ease and not have too much trouble with it. But higher tiers, of course, could offer more difficulty and better rewards for taking on the greater challenge. But I really think going back that making content accessible to a larger variety of players is very important as well, with having like the low barrier to entry to the tier 1 version of instances at least. And then, of course, the difficulty tiers do easily allow the system to work. But anyway, I got a little sidetracked there. What I really hope is that the new content is going to be not a big gear check, almost like Veils of Anduin was for me when I was kind of rocking my old level 115 and even some Mordor gear on my under-leveled Horde in there. That was a little interesting and a bit tough, but I think that's enough on the gear requirements for the new content. And one thing I would like to see out of the instances is good gear rewards, of course. And the newest stuff should obviously be the best, but I also hope that the stat scaling, as far as like how much better it is than the Minas Morgul content, the Minas Morgul instances, I hope it's not insane like it is for a good chunk of high-level LOTRO. Like the scale between 115 to 120 was crazy. Even going back to Mordor, 105 to 115 was crazy, and just a lot of big jumps in stats between content, and that's kind of a little bit annoying to me personally going through the game, but that's where I'll leave the end game gearing for now. But again, I do want to note that my experience from the end game in general is a bit odd because I'm just getting towards end game on Louisden right now, and hopefully by update 28, by time it releases, I will have participated in some of the new group content in LOTRO with Minas Morgul and to really have an updated opinion on how all this works. But even with that, without that experience, I still have like my hopes for how it will work in the update at least. But the last part of gearing and character progression, I'm going on so long about this, but that I want to get to with that is missions. Again, we have scarce details on these, but I hope that these, first of all, actually give valuable rewards other than just XP. And getting scaling gear, of course, would be nice. I think that's the most obvious reward you could get from something like that. And I think it would be a good thing, but what I really think is that missions have the potential to become a long-term system that could serve for an avenue of character progression as well. I think missions sound like they would be a perfect fit to include virtue experience as a reward. That way, if you do a bunch of missions, you have an alternative to deeding for the virtue XP, and this is something that can apply to characters of all levels as well. So now they could add some like legendary item catch-up mechanics, as I mentioned earlier, or just the other things I talk about with like class trait points, but I don't think any of that would be as feasible, because then if you run these as like a fresh level 20, you don't get any benefit from an Amphala Scroll of Empowerment if they gave like a bunch of those. So even if possibly unlikely, I really hope that missions would give virtue experience. Again, I just feel like they're the perfect fit, and that's why I keep mentioning it. But that is finally it for real with the gear and end-game progression. That was the last topic I did have to cover for my hopes for the update. In the future, we will see how the update holds up compared to my hopes, but for now we have very little information from what is essentially an early sneak peek at the content that Standing Stone Games has been working on for The Lord of the Rings Online. In the next few weeks, I will keep up with the news regarding the update and mini expansion, and will keep you all informed of the going-ons. Whenever the beta opens, I will also stream that and deep dive into it like I did with Update 24 before my unfortunate YouTube break period. But the last announcement I have at the end here is that I have all of the videos like this in a playlist down below in the description and comments. It contains all the reviews I've done, LOTRO news, and just my thoughts type videos regarding LOTRO. Anyway, for this video, I hope you all enjoyed it and learned something useful, and if you did, please consider liking and subscribing for more, or becoming a channel member to support the content, and thanks for watching, everyone.